Nathaniel Metherall is a historical interpreter at Queenston Heights. What's the significance of that battle?
Queenston Heights, a very significant battle for Canadian history. If it wasn't for this battle, I always tell my students that come to the tour that most of what is now Ontario would quite likely be part of the United States.
Because the Americans actually looked like they were going to win.
Certainly. In the morning, the U.S. had crossed over into Canada, had secured the Heights, Queenston Heights, taken the Heights, taken the Redan Battery, very crucial artillery piece, repulsed Sir Isaac Brock's counterattack in which he was killed, also repulsed Lieutenant Colonel John MacDonnell's counterattack. He was severely wounded, died the next morning of his wounds, and that was about 10:30. It looked like an American triumph. But after all that, Roger Sheaffe came along and turned it all around. He rallied his men, marched 3 kilometers in and around, and secured the Heights. In a final clash, they were able to push the Americans right off the ridge and save Canada. And very significant also because the militiamen, the natives, and the British regulars worked together to do this. And it seemed like, well, what started off, when the war first started, it seemed as though Upper Canada would fall quite easily. On paper, the numbers looked way off. The U.S. had more population. There weren't very many British regulars stationed in Upper Canada. And most of the people that were here, militiamen, were late loyalists, or 3/5 of them were recent arrivals from the United States. And these are the men that Brock would have to rely on to defend Canada, and it didn't look too promising.
How significant was the loss of Brock?
Certainly significant. When Brock was on the scene, it seemed like everything was okay. Brock was an officer the men had confidence in. Where Brock was around, you know, he had already gained fame at Detroit, was very well known as a mover and a shaker on the frontier, and where Brock was, victory was certain. That's what men felt. When he was killed, it devastated the ranks, morale plummeted, and all of a sudden people's minds were wondering, can we still win this war? Is it still possible to win the Battle of Queenston Heights and defeat the Americans? But sure enough, they were able to do it, but certainly it shook confidence.
Did Brock actually have last words?
Yeah, very good question.
Or is that just
yeah, well,
apocryphal?
Certainly, there are many historians after, guys like Benson Lossing, who very much romanticized Brock's death. You know,
Fight
push
on!
Yeah. And I graduated from Brock University. Motto was Surgite, which in Latin means push on. But our best account comes from a gentleman by the name of George Jarvis. He was a gentleman volunteer. And most of the guys that wore the 49th Regiment uniform, like myself, were uneducated. If you were a private, you didn't have much education. George Jarvis is significant because at night he wrote it all down in his journal. He wrote that he was behind Brock about 10 paces. They crossed over a stone wall and began to charge uphill. Brock took a glancing bullet in the left wrist. Didn't bother Brock much. He brazened his sword, pushed on, up the hill they went, and certainly in that context, maybe push on. But they charged up the hill. The second shot came and pierced Brock directly in the heart. George Jarvis saw him clench his breast. He fell on his left side. George Jarvis ran up and said, "Are you much hurt, sir?" General didn't reply. He was already dead. So that's probably the most likely account. Many historians have subsequently romanticized Brock's death, but probably no dying words. Maybe his last words were push on, but certainly no dying words.
And he was buried at the monument for a while.
Yes, he actually buried 4 times in his life. And when he was first killed, they buried him at Fort George on the 16th of October of 1812. And then in 1824, they built the first Brock's Monument on Queenston Heights, and they buried him there in 1824. It was destroyed in 1840 by a bomb. The suspect, most likely Benjamin Lett. So they actually had to destroy the monument, exhume Brock and MacDonnell, and bury them in the village of Queenston, right where we are now. And then 13 years later, 1853, they returned Brock to the present Brock's Monument. Yeah.
And his horse is Noble Albert?
Alfred.
Okay, hold on. And his horse, the Noble Alfred?
Yeah, Alfred, we're not too sure. A lot of people debate this as well. The records indicate that he got as far as York, so now Toronto. But whether he was here or not, Brock certainly would have had many horses. So whether Albert was actually at this site, speculation, certainly. Lots of room for a debate on that one.
The Aboriginal, forces were critical.
Absolutely. John Norton and his warriors. Just as it was when it looked like the battle was lost, John Norton and his warriors came about 2 o'clock. And when the British retreated, they on their own initiative, went on the heights and began fighting the Americans on the heights, basically preventing them from exploiting their morning success. And on that, Roger Schaeff was able to pivot around and take the heights. So very, very pivotal to the success of the Battle of Queenston Heights. And further, their severe war cries, not the you hear on these TV movies, but these blood-curdling cries actually prevented about 2,000 American militiamen from crossing into Canada.
Because they scared them.
Absolutely. So as a morale factor, as well as a physical force, so the natives were quite the force to be reckoned with.
How will this be commemorated?
Well, it happens to be October the 13th is a Saturday in 2012. So to the day, to the hour, around 4 o'clock, they're going to reenact the final phase of the battle on the exact site that it happened. So quite the unprecedented time, a golden reenactment because it happens on the exact date of the actual battle, 200 years to the day. But that whole weekend from Friday the 12th, Saturday the 13th, and Sunday the 14th of 2012 will be a whole series of commemorations and celebrations. From the battle itself, the night of the Friday night of the 12th, they're going to be having a camp set up on both sides of the river, and they're thinking right now of doing some sort of fireworks display kind of thing. And then the Saturday emphasis is the battle. The Sunday they're going to have a mock funeral procession of Sir Isaac Brock. That will be located in Niagara-on-the-Lake. So quite excited, certainly. Good time to be involved at the local history, absolutely.
So you'll be there?
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.